Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another event here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, our virtual location, which is globally coming to you globally through the World Wide Web. Thank you guys for joining us. My name is Ryan Maloney. I help out with the education and programming at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem. And on behalf of our executive director, Tracy Hyder-Suffern, along with our artistic team of Jonathan Batiste and Christian McBride, we want to welcome you all here tonight. Some of you, it might be your second time with us today. Earlier, we had the great Helen Sung, along with Nadja Marshall from the Zuckerman Institute over at Columbia University, the neuroscience brain research, and we got dug into the intersections between movement and music and the brain. And if you're interested in checking that out, it still lives on our Facebook page and over on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. For those of you who have not been to the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, we are located on 129th Street, just off of Lenox Avenue in northern Manhattan in the neighborhood of Harlem. We are not currently open to the public, but we hope to be in 2021. We will keep you abreast of our reopening activities. And if you're not signed up for our newsletter, you can do that over on our website, njmh.org. You can check out our past events archives. You can sign up for our newsletter. And if you are interested in supporting programming here at the National Jazz Museum in Harlem, you can make a financial contribution. You can text the word jazz to 41444 or right on our website, jmih.org/donate. And you can make a donation to the museum to support our ongoing programming. Tonight is a continuation of a series we've been running for several years now, Jazz and Social Justice. And this is a series that's curated and hosted by the journalist and writer Larry Blumenfeld, who you've probably read in the Wall Street Journal and basically any other jazz magazine or periodical that is out there in the world. So we're going to get things up and running here. Let me bring Larry into the party. 1 second here. And there he is. Larry, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, everybody.
It's a busy day. It's we have NBA, we have NHL, or we have baseball, and we have the debate. But we'll put those on pause, and we'll get things fired up here. So thanks for joining us, Larry.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good evening. Yes, in a way, we are sort of the opening band before the presidential debate, which makes some sense. As Ryan said, I'm Larry Blumenfeld. I guess in some ways, if you're in a red state, you might read me in the Wall Street Journal. In a blue state, you might have read me in the Village Voice, or you might read me in Daily Beast. But we're really not about those divisions tonight. We're really here to talk about voting in general, the joys, challenges, and importance of voting. Welcome to Regina Carter, Swing States and Getting Out the Vote, which is the 12th edition of Jazz and Social Justice, a salon with music. And I'm here in Brooklyn, New York, in the state of New York, where 4 years ago, the 29 electoral votes went quite handily for Hillary Clinton. First, I want to say a little bit about the museum. I have to give them great thanks. For more than a decade, they have supported and humored my passions. And the museum is really a place that celebrates jazz, not just as magnificent music, but also as a culture, a broader culture that is by its nature multicultural and addresses dimensions of social justice, spirituality, and our common humanity. I started this particular series in 2017 when we all awoke to a somewhat different country. And I participated in some marches, but I had this impulse to get salon-type discussions of very specific issues together. And I knew a lot of great artists, great musicians who felt strongly about this or that issue and made music that somehow addressed those issues. So we've had a series of these events where musicians presented music and we talked about immigration laws or environmentalism or bias based on race and gender or the incarceration state. To before from Regina's album. And it's a kind of a nice introduction to the both the music of the album and this. I should say, well, let me start with some introductions while we wait for that. Violinist Regina Carter is a multi-Grammy nominee. She's one of the most authoritative and distinct voices in the violin today.
Hey, Larry, we're having a little bit of hiccups on your feed. I just wanted to double check. I'm going to get that track for you. Which track was it that you wanted to get?
Well,
Track
just a
one?
brief track. Welcome. Thanks for bearing with us, folks.
All right, let me get that started here right now.
This is Regina Carter. Welcome to Swing States, Harmony and the Battleground. Growing up in Detroit, I was exposed to many cultures as a child. And we can all have that. I remember my parents marching and what my grandparents had to go through, and my great-grandmother watching on TV, seeing them being hosed and dogs after them. And that, for me, was enough to know that I had to go and vote, because they went through so much ugliness in order to allow me the privilege to vote. I usually try and get there midday. So if I go around 11, 12, or 1, it's usually pretty empty in my neighborhood, so I can zoom in and out.
Okay, and that's a little bit of an introduction into both the album and the idea of voting. I want to welcome our guests and hope that the internet gods smile upon us. As I said, Regina Carter is one of the most distinct and accomplished voices on the instrument of violin. Born in Detroit, she trained at the age of 4 in the Suzuki method. She's been named the artistic director of the New Jersey Performing Arts all-female jazz residency. She's on the faculty of the Manhattan School of Music, New Jersey City University, and artist in residence at Oakland University School of Music, Theater and Dance. She is from Michigan, a swing state with 16 pivotal electoral votes. In that state, Donald Trump won in 2016 by roughly 11,000 of the state's 5 million votes. I also want to welcome John Daversa, a multi-Grammy winning artist, composer, arranger, producer, band leader, who plays trumpet and flugelhorn brilliantly on this album and arranged the tunes. He was born in California, Los Angeles, California, where Hillary Clinton took that state by pretty much a 2-to-1 margin in 2016, and now lives in Miami, Florida, where he is chair and professor of studio music and jazz at the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami in Florida, where the 29 electoral votes in 2016 went for Trump by a little more than 100,000 of the more than 10 million votes. Florida, as some may know, has, with one exception, 1992, Florida has gone, the country has gone in presidential elections. Thanks for joining us. So Swing States, this project, Harmony in the Battleground. Regina, you started this project knowing that we'd have a presidential election, but of course not knowing we'd be living in a pandemic. How did this project come about? How did the idea and its connection to music start for you?
Well, I was having a conversation with one of the producers, Kabir Segal, and I was telling him how disappointed I was and really pretty upset at the amount of people that did not vote the last election, and especially African Americans. And so we were just talking, and then he said, "Oh, would you ever think about doing a record about voting?" And, it started as most records do or projects do. You start one place and where you end up is completely different. But, and we were talking about music, and then John Daversa and I were in conversations about different tunes, and I'd play something for him, send it, go back and forth. And then the idea came up because so many of us on the record were from swing states, to do our state songs. And Michigan state song sounds like "Oh Christmas Tree." So I didn't want to do that because I thought people would say, "Why is she recording a Christmas tune now?" But Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, who were on Motown in the 60s, they recorded a tune, "Dancing in the Streets," and that became a civil rights a tune, for getting people out to vote. And so it's people always think of that as they connect that with the civil rights. And you think of Michigan and Detroit with that. So we decided to record that one and several other great tunes.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because when we have an election, we are forced to remember that this country is a collection of states, and each one of them does have its own identity that comes out in music, but also comes out electorally. But also, as you very much established in this album, you can take any piece of music and play it in a swinging state of mind. John, how did that, when Regina talked to you about this idea, since you helped shape so much of the music here and the way it's played, how did that process begin, or how did you connect the idea with the music?
Well, we as Regina just said, we went back and forth with a lot of different songs to begin with, and once we came, sorry, my lights keep going in and out. Once we decided on the theme, that it was going to be, we could represent each person from each state. And then we started looking at all the songs associated with the states, and each song, I mean, there's not just one state song for each state, there's several, and then songs that are associated with the state. So it's a matter of trying to find the meaning and the intent behind what the song is and what it represents for the people of that state. There's a certain reverence that we need to hold for these songs. And then a lot of these are going to be, well, they're all instrumental, so it's trying to find melodies that seem like they are so, they have so much integrity to them that they can be melted over different forms and different feels. And then just try and envision the characters of everybody is their own character in the band, and just try to envision the character of everybody playing these things and spotlight that so that it has life.
So yes, and this band that Regina calls a freedom band, I should mention, has you, John, on trumpet and flugelhorn, Harvey Mason on drums, John Batiste on piano, Alexis Cuadrado as bassist, and also Kabir Segal, the producer, plays some bass and some percussion here. And as we play the music, you'll see, not you who've tuned in will see not just some pictures of the band and Regina, but maybe some helpful information related to voting. Regina, you mentioned Dancing in the Streets, and yeah, of course, I know it from the Martha Anna Vandella's Motown original. I know it from so many covers, from David Bowie and Mick Jagger, to the Mamas and the Papas, to Ramsey Lewis, to Van Halen. Some of them I like, some of them I don't like. But this is a very different version than we've heard. So maybe let's listen to that one and then we'll come talk some more.
Okay.
And as I've said, you may be surprised by the approach here.
The silent approach.
Very deep.
Okay, I'm gonna, you know, over this means I have to apologize. The sound is a little compromised. So I'm gonna suggest that people get this album or download these tracks. But even with those problems, Regina, your sound just cuts right through and is so beautiful. And John, the soulfulness of your playing just obliterates any of those problems. So here, there's this song written in 1963 or 4. I think that, by Marvin Gaye, William Stevenson, and Ivy Joe Hunter was a major Motown hit and was, really an upbeat, dancing in the streets. You've turned it into somewhat of a lament, right?
Yeah.
How did that work in terms of?
Yeah. I was thinking about that as I was playing. I remember waking up with it in my head that way.
Mm-hmm.
And the feeling was, when you've just been grinding and grinding and grinding and working toward something that you're really passionate about, trying to see change, whatever it may be. And you've been grinding so long and you see no results. It's just kind of that moment where you go, you let yourself be solemn for a moment, and you're going to regroup, but it's just kind of that moment where you're just at the bottom. Not hopelessness, but just let's regroup. Let's regroup so we can gain some energy to go forward. That's how I was feeling, but I really just woke up with that vibe. In the morning I went to the piano and that little descending thumb thing. Oh, dancing in the dark.
That's
there we go. And there it was. And then the band, the band made it happen. The band made it real.
Regina, 1964 in Detroit was both a loaded and an exuberant moment. And that history of Motown is both musically and politically important. What was, for you, growing up in Detroit, what was the political environment or the consciousness environment like when you were coming of age as a musician?
Well, I was born in 62, and I remember when the riots happened in Detroit. I remember the tanks driving down our street, standing on the porch, and my mother yelling for us to get in the house. And, knowing all the rioting that was going on throughout the city. But I know that then people were very conscious, politically conscious about what was going on and very much involved. And in my household at that time, my parents would, read the paper, discuss the candidates, watch the news, and I'd hear them talking about it. And they'd take me with them to vote. And then my mom, who was a kindergarten teacher, sometimes I would go to her kindergarten class and she would set up voting for her kids. She would talk about that, be their lesson, and they get in line and vote just so they understood the process. And at that time, people didn't talk about who they were voting for. You didn't talk about politics outside your house. It was personal. Right. Mother said there are 3 things you don't talk about: politics, religion, 4 things, money, and your age. And so, just there was more community everywhere, a sense of community. And I didn't experience, I know that my mom grew up in Detroit. She was born in 1926, and she was born in an area called Black Bottom, Detroit. And it was an area, there were a couple of areas where Blacks and some immigrants were forced to live. If you crossed certain streets, you'd be arrested. And my mom was dirt poor. She said for Christmas, she might get an apple or a doll or a dress. Everybody came back to school with the same dress on. But they maybe lived next door, across from a doctor, somebody. The communities took care of each other. They looked out for each other. And so there was some wealth there too. And then, of course, there was the Highway Act that came through and built I-75 through there because they wanted that property. And it displaced all these African Americans out of their homes and businesses without necessarily paying them. That's not what I wanted to say, but and some were left homeless or living in projects. So I knew all of that, and and watching the marches on television and just being educated about everything and why it's so important to vote. And I just remember always growing up saying, wow, I'm glad I didn't live during that time. And then all of a sudden I wake up and it's like we've been snatched right back to that.
That's precisely what I was going to ask you. Does, even just since you recorded this album, so much has happened. Do you feel like, okay, suddenly our election is thrust into a very similar environment?
I do. I even feel like it's worse than that, because I feel like then without, I don't know, I kind of think with social media, the internet, all of that, people there's a lot of misinformation.
Oh, yeah.
And people will take that as their news, and they don't necessarily bother to investigate if it's right or not. And sometimes that's due to because it sounds good, it works for them, so they'll go with it. Doesn't matter how crazy it sounds, it works for them. And I think there's so much divisiveness, and it always has been, but we really see it now. And the thing which is so crazy is because we all want the same basic things. We want food to eat. We want a decent paying job, so we don't have to work 3 and 4 jobs to try and feed our families. We want the same education. We want health care without paying, out the nose for it. And so I don't really, well, I do understand, what the problem is, but
I know you say harmony in the battleground, which is acknowledging that divide, but I do get the impression here that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I get the impression that you're saying, well, this music or any good music is one of the things that can help cross that divide for us.
Well, I hope so. And just for people to see that we all want the same things.
Right.
And that my being here is not taking anything away from you. The way I look, the way I speak, the way I worship, the way I love.
Yeah.
It's not taking anything or doing anything derogatory to anyone else. And so
the way you play the violin, which at one point in history might have been looked upon a certain way.
Exactly.
Can we listen to a little more music? And let's listen to a little more music. And another song that I think is you present in a very different way than we're used to is Rocky Mountain High, which John Denver wrote inspired by his move to Aspen, Colorado. and it was a big hit in 1973. And it's always identified with that region and that state, which in 2016, its 9 votes went to Clinton by nearly 5%. So can we hear a little bit of Rocky Mountain High, which, you know, I grew up hearing that song as recorded by John Denver, but this is not that tune, or it is that, just not that version. And now here you folks have taken a tune that I know is so placid and airy and kind of injected it with a whole different energy, right?
I guess that's for me.
Is this another one you woke up hearing it this way?
I can feel Regina looking at me.
Well, John, let me ask you: is this a tune that you knew you knew as a pop hit way back in the back of your head?
I did, yeah. And you know, I grew up in, I mean, I'm from LA, but we moved to Oklahoma when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I was 7. And we used to vacation up in Colorado, you know, in a tiny little town called Pitkin. And
Mhm.
and actually right before the lockdown in March, I was doing the gigs in a clinic in Denver and Boulder. So I could feel the air, you know, the freshness of the air, that openness, like you were talking about. So I still wanted to keep that, of course, but I was also thinking about just trying to find some sort of a motor that would propel this. So I came up with that bass line, and I wanted to come up with something that had some open strings in it for the bass, so it had more of a mountain flair to it. And then I wanted to create an open section, a place for Regina just to improvise with Harvey, just
Yeah.
just with the rhythm,
Mhm.
and just thinking about the violin itself, with just in a key that would have some open strings, and I was just kind of imagining where she might take that, and boy, I just, you know, it's I love writing music because you have a certain idea of and direction and intent of how you hear it, how you envision it. But then there's, you know, when you bring it to the band, there's an openness, there's a trust to say, okay, now how do you hear it? You know, within a certain framework, and that's the whole joy for me.
And that conversation between the violin and the drums is just so wonderful in that tune.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
Either Regina or both of you, I want to open the conversation up in a minute or two to our other speakers. But do you feel like, do you feel like this musical offering, if people hear it and consider what you're doing here, can it change the mindset as we head into November? Is that part of your wish here?
I hope it will change the mindset for people that don't vote to go vote.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave it at that.
I buy that. Okay, I want to thank John, who's gonna split, and he has to live very carefully now because he's in Miami, but he's rooting for the LA Lakers in the final. So understand, you have to plan your moves carefully. Thank you so much, and I want to welcome.
Thank
to
you,
our
John.
conversation.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks for that beautiful music.
Vote.
Vote. That is the resounding theme here. I want to welcome into our conversation two other people. Checo Yancy is Director of Voters Organized to Educate, Vote, an organization established to advocate for restoring the voting rights of formerly incarcerated people. He's worked with the Louisiana Department of Corrections and Louisiana Legislature, the Louisianans for Prison Alternatives, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the ACLU, and other partners to restore voting rights and more broadly, securing human and civil rights of formerly incarcerated individuals. Mr. Yancy, who was incarcerated in Louisiana State Prison, gained his right to vote in 2019 and has been voting ever since. I also want to welcome Crystal Joseph, who's Vice President of Communications for the League of Women Voters, New York City. She first discovered the League of Women Voters while pursuing a master's thesis on movement building in the 21st century, and she's deepened and broadened their mission. And she's currently a doctoral resident at Concordia University, Portland, pursuing a doctorate in education and transformational leadership. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Okay. I want to welcome them, and there's so much coming at us from so many directions about voting, but also about this context for voting in which we have concerns and information we need. And maybe if I could start, Crystal, and just ask you could succinctly give us an idea of, well, what did you discover about the history of this League of Women Voters and what it meant and what it means now and what it does?
So one of the things that actually drove me to the organization was, as a millennial, I was looking at sort of trends in sort of civic engagement, education, and participation. And so as a former middle school teacher and now working in higher education, I just sort of saw a decline in sort of the engagement around the civics process, what it entails, how to keep momentum, what keeps people involved in the process and eventually actually getting out to vote. And I saw that there was a lot of different avenues for millennials to participate in. And that sort of pluralized the conversation a little bit more. So there were archaic organizations like the League who've been doing the work for so long, but people often forgot about them. So historically, as the history buff that I am, I was just naturally drawn to them because there is a rich history there. We have a phenomenal archive collection about sort of what it meant to fight for the 19th, right? And so being a part of the organization for me, despite some of the mired sort of history that comes along with the organization, which is all things that we're currently working on. So we're seeking to sort of expand the organizational outreach through this diversity and equity and inclusion lens that historically marginalized people of color. And so for myself, I feel as though I am an ambassador for the organization, not only as a millennial, but as a person of color. And I sort of work to sort of keep the conversation around civics, education, participatory government in a nonpartisan lens. And that's one of the things that I'm proud of. We are not political. We do not champion for any particular party or organization, but as a matter of just making sure that folks who are involved in the process of democracy are educated, informed, and have all the tools that they need to get out there and vote in the general election.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm old enough to have a fondness in my heart for the League of Women Voters because, I'm going to go home and watch this debate tonight. But I remember when there were debates that seemed more like really structured, like nonpartisan events and real debates, and they were sponsored by the League of Women Voters. And that's what that organization meant to me. And when I watch the debates now, it's not quite the same. I want to come back to some of the things you were saying, but Checo, I know, recently someone sent me an email about 750,000 Floridians perhaps being denied their right to vote, and that the Supreme Court upheld a law requiring Floridians with felony convictions to pay their fines before they can vote. And in her dissent, Sonia Sotomayor wrote that this is a modern-day poll tax that prevents thousands of otherwise eligible voters from participating simply because they are poor. Now, can you give us an idea of the work you're doing in Louisiana and the ways that, what happens to some people in terms of their voting rights?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I had an opportunity to go to Florida. Our organization did with Desmond when they was fighting for to get their voting rights. So I got a chance to meet him. In fact, we're all part of the same organization, the FICP-FM, which is the Former Incarcerated Convicted Persons and Family Movement. And it's amazing that when they won that, they came back later and said, now if you owe fines and fees, right, you got to pay. And we were like, wow, okay, this is a poll tax, and it's the same old thing that, suppress the vote. But, we're looking now that we got a very rich guy that's paying fines. Okay. So now they're saying he's buying votes, but he's just paying the fines off. He's not telling anybody who to vote for. But, I just wonder, and with everybody that's on this call or on this webinar tonight that's watching this with Rocky Mountain High and Dancing in the Street, and by the way, Regina, I'm when I go in, I'm going to download that tonight, and it inspired me. I love music. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, so I'm way back with. When you said 62, I was going in the military in 1962. So I'll be 75 in a couple of months. But
God bless you.
From the old school, because God say He gives you 70, so I got 5 more, especially in this day we live in. But the thing about it is, I wonder, and I guess I'm asking this to the listening audience and to you guys that may be a lot smarter than I am. Why would you make it so hard to vote and suppress it if it wasn't important?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when we really look at this, voting is a responsibility, not just a right. You know, I was listening to you, Regina, and you're right. When I was growing up, my grandparents and people that had the right to vote, they took the kids, they took all of us so we could see that and know how important it was. And, you know, now people are fighting. You know, when you look at 45, I try not to call that guy's name, whatever I can do, you know, but the question I'd like to ask him if I had that opportunity, every night on the news, he's saying that he might not leave because the ballot's going to mess up. Well, the question should be asked, if you win, are you going to say the ballot was messed up?
Right.
You're always talking about in the negative part, but it's all a ball of confusion. I think about the Temptations, a ball of confusion.
Yep.
Ball of confusion, you know. And you know, he's taking the minds off of COVID-19 that we've seen now. 205,100 people have died, and he takes no responsibility for that. And he said, "We're turning the curve. We're turning." What does that mean?
Right.
You know. So when you really look at voting and you look at everything that we're doing, you know, we have to understand that if voting wasn't important, why would you keep trying to find a way to suppress it?
Yes, and that's a very good point.
And I'm sorry, I want to jump in and say, and that's what really angers me still to see, you know, when I go on social media and I see influencers, African American influencers who are saying our vote doesn't count, don't vote, it's not, it doesn't mean anything. And, you know, I usually tell myself, just don't answer that stuff or don't. And I said, you know, how can you say you're not going to vote when you know that I'm sure some of your family members were killed or had dogs, and they were like, well, we're not doing that anymore. We're not voting for them. We're not you know, and I don't understand. No one can tell me a reason why.
Can I make this personal, Regina?
Mm-hmm.
In some states and some races, people are winning by 2 votes.
Right.
They're winning by 27 votes.
Yeah.
That means if your mother said, you know, I'm not voting, it don't mean anything. What if she had voted? Or your cousin or your friend that you may watch the game with or have a beer. So to me, you know, every vote counts, and we have to, you know how you get that spam and junk mail, and you have to, some of that stuff you just have to let it go over your head, you know. But
you're bringing, I mean, as I said before, in Michigan in 2016, it was 11,000 votes out of 5 million voters. I mean, that's nothing. But I'm so glad, Checo, that you brought up also the kind of joy, and Regina, you talked about sharing that experience. I mean, I was born around the same time as you, Regina, and I remember in my public school in Brooklyn, I was an artist, and was for the vote, I drew a gigantic Uncle Tom pointing his finger to where the polls were. And this was like a big event. This was like an event in our community, not just, oh, it's, you know, it's time to vote. This was like something we shared as much as we shared Halloween, but we also knew there was a sense of duty. But Checo, I wanted to ask you, since there was a long period of time when you couldn't vote, right?
Well, yes, I did something in 1983 that sent me to prison. And I spent 20 years in Angola, one of the bloodiest prisons in America. And
go ahead. What did it feel like when you voted again in 2019?
You know, I won't say indescribable, but I'll say that it was something that lift off my shoulders, that, you know, wow, I have an opportunity now and I have a say so. But you know, the real deal was, and I'll break it down. I had somebody to come and ask me would I vote for them. And I said, wow, okay. So my vote does, and my matter, you know, my mind and matter and everything that's going on, somebody's asking me for their vote, for that vote. So that means your vote does count. Because think about it, how many people we're getting emails, we're getting all kinds of stuff, and people are asking us all the time, vote for me. I'm don't do this, and then I'm thinking about the temptation. Vote for me, and I'll set you free. You know.
You're absolutely correct. I think that most people will often have the interpretation that we are the people from the Constitution doesn't matter, right? But on election day, we are legitimizing our democracy. So we have, whether you view it as a right or a privilege, we have an obligation to turn out that vote. And I think as someone from an organization who does education and training for the public, the one thing, especially now that we want folks to know, is to have a plan. You know, there's a lot of different options, and choose the mechanism that's right for you. So if it's the absentee vote, absentee ballot, fill it out as appropriately as possible. There's a lot of different rules. Follow the rules as accurately as possible. Take advantage of the early voting days if you're in New York City, or show up on election day with the ballot. You can also take that absentee ballot into your county board of elections as sort of a drop box. So there should be no excuse. You know,
Well, there shouldn't be no excuse, because we just won a case here in Louisiana that our Secretary of State, he had a good plan for the summer when COVID was really early, but he went back and tried to take something away in the fall where we got flu coming and all that. Well, our organization, one of our members, we sued them, and we got extended time for registration. And that's what tells me that if people stand up, you know, you can't let the bullet just punch you in the mouth all the time. Okay, at some point you may just pick up a rock and kill Goliath. Okay, so you have to, you know, you're laughing, but you know, David just picked up a rock and you know, and slung it, you know. So, but if you don't fight back, then the bullet will keep hitting you, you know. But the thing about it, we won and we got extended. But my when you ask me what did it feel like, after I know that I had my voting rights back, my term that I use for myself personally, I will beat you to the polls. I will beat you to the polls. You're gonna let a former incarcerated person that spent 20 years in prison beat you to the polls? Shame on you. So you know, I go at early vote. I don't take. I'm elderly. I don't take a chance on mailing my ballot. I don't take a chance on that, because when I was out there partying, I've been to hurricane parties. I've been to all kinds of parties when it's storming. But why can't I go out and vote? It's not too cold. I don't care if it's raining. So if I go early vote, then guess what? I've gotten it in. I've gotten it in. You know, so that's what it feels like. With me, to know that hey, wow, I can raise my fist high and said, I have voted. Have you? I beat you to the polls. Right. So that's what it felt like. It feels like, wow, my responsibility. I've done what I'm supposed to do. Now I challenge you. Have you voted yet?
I like that. You know, Checo mentioned you know, some threats about what might happen after the election, but we've been hearing a lot of stuff about the election itself. Is there, you know, given the challenges that we're hearing about now, to potentially, you know, challenge the votes that are mailed in or the absentee ballots, is it important for people to focus on going to their polling place if they can and vote in person in these swing states? Do we have to worry about that?
I think people should, you know, go and go cast your vote by any means necessary. Go and cast your vote, because we don't know how this is going to come out. We know that in 2016, Hillary won the popular vote.
Yep.
And everybody lulled themselves asleep. And I saw an interesting stat. I know whether you guys have been seeing it if you watch some of the sports and stuff, but 60% of people only voted last time. So that meant 40% of the people didn't vote, whether you didn't like Hillary or you whatever. I'm not going to vote. Well, a no, if you don't go vote, that's voting for the opponent. And we have to really understand that, you know, and then what this really does is, and I'm sure Regina and, you know, with the League of Women Voters, it's really civics. Remember we took civics in the 8th grade?
Mm-hmm.
We learn about how all this go, and now guess what? This is what it's all about. It's civics 101, what you learned in the 8th grade.
But they took that out of the schools.
They took that out of the curriculum.
There are only 6 states that now require a civics education as part of their curriculum.
Right.
But civics is the most important part, because why would you remove it if it wasn't important? And so when we're looking at this, the organization that I work for now, Vote, we actually started this organization inside the prison in 1987 because we wanted the laws changed, and we were begging people to, try to get people out of prison. And one day we realized the only way to change the law, the person that makes the law, is the elected official. So if we get our families and friends involved in registering people to vote, so we had to educate, then we could organize, and then we can mobilize. And that's what we're doing now, educating people that, hey, your vote counts. You got to get to the polls. It doesn't matter. I mean, everybody now wants to go to the football game. You want to go to this. Why not go to the polls?
And not just during the presidential election either, is one of the
that part,
right.
participants here. The state representative, your school board, whatever it is, you gotta vote.
Your dog catcher, because he's gonna run for dog catcher now, and then later he's gonna want to be the head dog catcher. Okay, so you have to vote down the ballot, and even here now, as our organization, we have a chapter here in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, and Shreveport, and it's all run by former incarcerated people. And we're teaching our people that, hey, it's important to get out and vote, because I tell people a couple of years ago, I was at Loyola for a conference, and the lady was doing, I don't know whether you guys remember this or not, but years ago, to be African American, when we was Negroes then, okay, let's go back, okay, you had to take a test.
Mm-hmm.
Literacy exam.
And if you had 5 minutes to take that test, and guess what? If you missed one question, you couldn't vote. And my Caucasian friend or brother could come in and put an X on it, and they could go right in and vote. So what I did at Christmas time a few years back, I Googled it, pulled the test down, and that's what we did. Instead of paying spades or whist or something like that, I put up $100 bill, and I said that whoever passed this test and get everything right will get the $100 bill. And I think some of my family members are pretty smart, and the guests that were there, and nobody could pass the test. But the message I was trying to send was, we have to get out and vote. People died for this. Dogs put on people, hoses. I mean, people got hung, and now we just take it as nonchalant that it doesn't matter,
And to Regina's point as well, we want to see consistency in the election cycles, right? So not only during the presidential, but sort of during these off-season elections where they matter more to local communities and getting funds into the hands of folks who actually need it, right? And so one of the things that we see in trends in voting is that they tend to be for folks who are wealthy and more educated, right? And so I think even in my own family, like I'm always one who's championing folks who, just don't come up for the candidate who, you really want to see win, but come out every year because it's important. And I think there's a level of cynicism and even self-suppression when a person doesn't vote consistently. And so if we're going to protect our democracy, we do that every single election cycle and year.
And you have to know your vote. That is our tagline for our organization. We have the C4 side and the C3 side. And a lot of folks don't understand that C3 can educate people, C4 can endorse people. Well, guess what? We have a ballot. We have a ballot that's put out by former incarcerated people, and nobody can pay us to be on the ballot. You have to fill out our survey that we send to you, so we'll know where you are and what you're going to do. And then we're going to hold you accountable in those next 4 years. Remember what you said here? You said that you're going to do this. So you hold people accountable, because people will say, vote for me and I'll set you free. And once they come to your church or your organization, they have gone and forgotten. We cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow this boy 45. Think about 4 more years.
Right.
Look what we've been through this for. I mean, my God, what could we go through? Could we do that 4 more years? I think not.
I want to jump in, and for those of you streaming and watching, if you want to post any questions at a certain point for our panelists, we can do that. Checo, you mentioned statistics. I came across a statistic that in 2016, 100 million registered voters did not vote. That blew my mind. Crystal, what are some of the ways in which organizations are going about rebuilding the mass of voters?
I think one of the things, at least at the league, that we're trying to do is to let folks know that even with the pandemic in the sort of air, that we want folks to take advantage of the options that they have. So have a voting plan, right? Know all of the deadlines and the dates, and just make sure that you're casting a legitimate ballot, and don't get confused or bogged down by the options. Choose a mechanism that's the best for you. So Checo spoke about how he's going to bring that ballot in person. And if that works for folks, do it that way. If they're casting an absentee, sign the envelopes appropriately, figure out if there's any discrepancies in terms of address, incorrect information that's not, correct those at the forefront. And if there's any hesitation on your part, walk in on the day of election and cast the vote. Most of these poll sites will be open until at least 9 p.m.
And in Louisiana, we have what we call on our phone, it's called Go Vote. In Louisiana, they don't do like G-O in other states. It's G-A-U-X, Cajun in French here in Louisiana. But you can actually download your ballot in your district, so you can check that out. That is the plan, Crystal, that you're talking about. Yes. So you don't get confused. You don't let anybody rush you. You've already familiarized yourself. You have it. You can bring it in. And if you have your ballot with you that you got on your phone, or you bring in a paper ballot that we have, that we're suggesting to people that we're supporting, if you have these, then you go in, like you said, Crystal, you go in with a game plan. You're not pressured by anything. You don't feel like it's 2 minutes, 2 seconds to go in the game. You got to kick the winning field goal or whatever. You're going in and you have a game plan because you know what you want to do.
Yes. And for folks who want to know information by their state, we manage our website, vote411.org. You can find everything from how to register to your polling site, to your early polling site. All the information is in one location. So we ask folks to go there to get the information that's specific for them.
And that's a good game plan, Crystal and Larry and Regina, because I don't know whether we realize it across the country, they're changing polling places.
Yes.
Because of COVID right now, they're looking for election commissioners to come in and work. So, you got all these big stadiums and everything. So why not have a polling place that people feel comfortable at, park and everything? So you have to check your status. We're not talking about AIDS, anything like that, STD. Check your status on your vote. Where's your polling place? Is it still there? Is it going to be changed in the last? You got up those last 24 hours to check your status to make sure your polling place is still there. Here in Louisiana, we just had a hurricane in Lake Charles. It wiped out a whole town. So those people in that area, we're trying to work to find out, where are you going to have the voting? Where is the voting? You're talking about over 100,000 people in that area. My God, that changes something. Okay, those little few electoral votes here in Louisiana, they mean something. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, what if a question, if people are going to their polling stations and they're seeing things that are irregular or troubling, like ridiculously long lines or something that seems out of whack, or a presence of military and police who are in an intimidating way, what should people do? Is there a way to notify, or
In every state, I don't want to take up all of it, but in every state, there's a hotline that you can call. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Somebody just popped it up here on the screen here. Election Day problems. Those are legitimate. Here around the country right now, we're trying to get polling monitors. Okay, that's non-partisan, but people that can go around. If you notice those long lines, or you notice that machines are being broken and stuff, that you can report this so people will be aware of this, because I believe that any way possible that they're going to try to steal this election. 45 is saying they're going to try to steal it on the other side, but all the time they're prepared to try to do what they can. So we need to be very, very, very aware.
Yeah.
I've actually filled out.
Oh, no, it's fine. For folks in the city, if they have election day issues, we do have a hotline for the day of and leading up to through the early voting days. So definitely give us a call. We definitely keep a log of any sort of issues that come up during the election cycle.
And you know what? If you're able to and feel comfortable, please fill out an application and work at a poll. Do whatever you can do. I filled out my application, and so we all have to. It's on all of us to do whatever it is we can do.
Yeah, I think it is. The title of your album is Swing States, and whatever your political inclination is, if you can, or people who can, do activism to get the vote out in those states, because those states are going to swing an election. It's not a euphemism, it's real. Regina, I wanted to ask you, do you feel like the energy around voting and voting rights and the effects of voting right now are as powerful as they were when you were growing up in Detroit? Do you feel like we're re-energized in any way about these issues?
It's difficult to say. I feel an energy now. Growing up, I can't really compare it to that, because it just was something that you did. Everyone, as far as I knew, everyone voted. It was that's just what you did. So, but I for some, I know there's still that apathy happening, but for most part, I feel that people are really energized, and especially when I look at young voters, young people in this country, Crystal's age and younger, and they're out here. They are energized, and I think we owe them. I mean, there's things have happened. They've been happening, but being shut down, being locked up in the house during the pandemic, and being in front of the TV, everybody got to see some of what we've been experiencing as African Americans, and they can either do something about it, which some have, or they can turn a blind eye. But young people they're out there, they're energized, and they're not letting this go. So that amen, and more power to them. And we have to support them however we can.
I applaud all the young people. I mean, I just felt like if the election was about 30 days back, we would probably have this conversation now. We'd be having a victory conversation of look what we've done, because the young people are Crystal. I tell you, you energize me that, hey, no matter what, I got to do what I got to do,
Yeah, and as a millennial, I look to the next generation, so the Gen Zers, and we have an ambassador sort of program, New York City Youth Civics Initiative. And so what the young people there are doing is using us sort of as ambassadors or just coaches in the process, and they're driving the conversation through issue-based advocacy and civic education amongst their peers. So these young adults are working through environmental justice issues, issues with differences in education equity, social justice causes. So they're taking issues that are unique to them and their generation, but then they're channeling that energy into driving out the vote. And I think that's a great way to sort of keep that conversation going and keep the momentum in throughout each election cycle. And these are issues that they're passionate about. And so they really just want us to be there just to sort of champion their goals and give them some guidance. But they're leading the conversation on their own, and it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring.
I heard this little youngster that said that he told an elected official, I forgot what state it was in. He said, "I am 17 now, and you don't want to listen to me, but by election time, I will be 18." But that meant right then,
he's ready to go.
That means he's educated enough to know I can make a difference.
Yeah.
You may not want to hear me now, but you'll listen to me later.
And Crystal, I love the fact that you said keep the conversation going, because, first of all, it's not voting is not something you just do once every 4 years. Then, as we said, there's every 2 years, a different election where a lot of our government is reformed, and there are all kinds of local and state and city and local elections. But yeah, if you think about it, if you're a conscientious voter, this is an ongoing conversation. There's going to be a continuity of, you're going to get smarter and more involved, and voting is part of your life. It's, hey, don't do the dishes once and then you're done. You're going to do them again. So, I remember when I was a kid, people would say, vote your conscience. And I was like, I don't know what that meant, but I'm like, well, if you're going to vote your conscience, you need to have a conscience, first of all, and you need to be informed. So, okay, in less than 45 minutes, a lot of people here are going to go tune into a debate. Do anyone here have any advice about how to process whatever goes on in that debate in terms of your ongoing conversation as a voter?
I would say listen to the issues. Listen to the issues, take notes. One thing that we want people to do is, we never encourage folks to have a specific opinion, but listen carefully to what folks are saying. And we hate the term educated voter. We like the term informed voter. So go in informed, listen to these debates informed. Keep an ear out to issues that are relevant to you, and take notes. You're going to know what's on your ballot, and you want to be sure that when you go in there, you make the decision that's best for you. So listen closely.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like so many people now are so charged about it, and they're hold fast to, it could be one thing, one belief they have about this one thing over here, that they sacrifice all these other things that could hurt all these other people, including their neighbors, because of this one thing. That's difficult. And that's a difficult one right there. Or just not being able to hear, like Crystal said, listen, some of us were this is what I'm doing. We can't hear what someone else is saying. And that's why we can't have those conversations, because we're not willing to hear one another.
And I think there's a lot of issues for a lot of different people, and we kind of coined the term listening to WIFM. What's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
What's in it for me? And I'm not talking about personally. I'm talking about my neighborhood. I have a granddaughter that's 12 years old. I mean, her future is bright, So what's in it for me? I mean, when you heard yesterday and the story broke that, the person hasn't paid but $700 and some in taxes. Okay. And that's got to be fake news and all of that. But, when you really look at it, we already know what's going to happen at this debate. Okay. We know that the bully is going to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish it would be fact checking that, if somebody says something that's not true, fact check it and put it out there, because people are believing what they hear, these little sound bites. And as Crystal is saying now, you have to be very, very informed. what's in it for me? What does this mean for my neighborhood? I mean, you know, you have to understand that if the science is telling you to wear a mask, 200 and some thousand people have died. Wouldn't it make sense to put a mask on? If you're the commander in chief and you're saying, do and follow the law, but you're gonna hold a rally and you're not, but then you make everybody sign a waiver and says, I'm not responsible now if you get sick.
Right.
Something's wrong with that.
Yes, it's very important to look into the details because, you know, the Congress passed a, you know, they should pass another one, and we could discuss that, but they did pass a very large appropriation to send money into places when this pandemic began. But if you look closely at that, embedded in that was protection of companies so that they would not be liable if, so, you know, I mean, for me, we're inundated with so much information now, much of it manipulative and bad. But one good thing is that we do, unlike when I was a boy, now you can watch a debate and you have many resources when that debate is over, even in real time, to fact check people.
Right.
And just, you know, you could feel one way politically or another way, but it is good to fact check things. There are still things called fact, despite what some people say. And, you know, there's also, I actually find that it's very important to hear what other people are saying. Whether I like them or not, I check out other sources of news other than the ones that I'm inclined to check out. I want to hear those voices. I want to know what they're saying, whether I think it's distasteful, you know, and there's, you know, there's lying and spin on both sides. And it is, you know, I feel like we used to have, you use the word conversation, Crystal. I feel like we used to have more of a national conversation. Maybe it was just as dirty. Maybe it was just as nasty. There's been electioneering and cheating all through our history. But I feel like, you know, that's why I applaud Regina. What, you know, what you're trying to do with this project is, what I love about it is, on the one hand, you've got these musicians having these little 4, 5, 6 minute conversations, but you're trying to build a conversation. You know, I feel like that's very, you know, I usually, Crystal, often I won't hear what someone in your community, your generation will be saying and what your priorities are.
And I think that's one of the goals, at least with our organization, is sort of, there's like almost a contention between like the boomers and then the millennials and then the Gen Z coming up wanting to have a voice also in the conversation. And the one thing that we try to do, at least as an organization, is create dialogue or create spaces for those dialogues to happen where we do listen to one another and try to learn from them. So I learn from the boomers. I would hope that as a millennial, I could inspire someone in the upcoming generation. And then I want to support each of those generations respectively as best as I can. So if we take that mindset into the election process and sort of listen holistically through debates and forums and weigh the pros and cons of each issue, knowing that we're never going to all agree on one specific issue, but what is your reasonable choice and what are the reasonable decisions that this person could make on your behalf that would benefit a good majority? And keeping in mind also that the census is very important and tomorrow's the last day to complete that.
Yeah.
So make sure that if you haven't done so, you do that as well.
Yeah, I feel like also we've just, you know, how if you read an article and you've got those hot button words that you can click on, you know, there are things that come up like, Regina, you talked about Black Bottom. I realize you're wearing a shirt that says Black Bottom. And
Black Bottom.
If
Detroit.
you look at the history of, you know, and Checo, you probably know New Orleans well enough to know, well, it's a similar story when the I-10 was built and ripped through Tremé in New Orleans.
When they come through, people have listened to Regina, and it's the same thing happened. You know, when you learn what eminent domain means, you know, so the highway comes through, and people own property for years, a generation in their family, and all of a sudden somebody wants this, and they bring it through it, and it's gone. You know, I mean. But I was thinking of a tune in my head, listening to Regina. And I want to give you a project, Regina. Oh, you're laughing, but think about
No,
this.
I listen. I'm not. I'm just like, come on now.
Donny Hathaway. Someday we'll all be.
Mm.
The world is spinning around, but just hang on. Just hang on. I mean, if you really listen to those words with Donny Hathaway, man was a genius, you know, and his daughter now worked with the Black Voter Matters regime down here in Louisiana. Okay. And I was talking to her and she said she goes back and listen to some of her daddy's work and everything. But just think about that. Someday we'll all be free. And if you really listen at the words to that, well, I'd love to hear the violin, how you would put a spin on that. Okay.
Okay. I'll contact you when I do that.
All right. Larry can give you my information, but seriously though, think about that because
Okay.
you know, and then when you go back to Nina Simone, young, gifted and black.
Gifted and black.
Look at Crystal. Look at Crystal, young, gifted and black.
Yeah, in
And there's
2000.
something very special about infusing the arts and culture into conversation on civics and education and voting. I think it gives people something to balance the equation out with, because it's like a little bit of serious, a little bit of fun, a little bit of community, and we all learn from one another this way. I mean, I can't say that I'm walking away from this conversation the same. I'm walking away inspired, and that's going to be something that drives me to the polls no matter what.
And it's like Larry started out about Louisiana. See, in Louisiana, they call it a gumbo.
Mm.
Everything in it. And guess what? It comes out and you're sipping it and tasting it and say, wow, look at this taste, you know. So, you know, I'm going to leave this conversation more inspired because I just, before we were doing this, you know, we're actually putting people on the street to go knock on doors, to put door hangers, because we're living in a different time, COVID. So you can't talk to people like you used to. So you just put the information out there so people can sit down and look at it.
You know, I want to take Crystal that great thought about culture and carry it even further because, like, you know, for instance, I've been writing about Regina Carter and her work for more than a decade. And it's not just because, hey, this is great music and I want to share it with you. It's that. But it's also we have a cultural life. We have a culture that's way beyond downloadable tracks. That's way beyond sound bites. And that is something that really binds us and it even empowers us, because when power is taken away, it can be reclaimed often through culture. And in my dream, voting is part of that culture. It's a right, it's a responsibility, all those things, but it's also like a cultural activity that we share that can bind us. I mean, when I see people in newly freed democracies that can, you know, hold up their thumbs stamped because they voted with, hey, whatever may or may not have happened in those nations, there is a moment of community there. And I like to believe that, you know, when Regina Carter plays her violin, that moment of community can be a little like the moment of community we can have there. I want to move to, we have a late breaking message from the pianist on Regina's album, John Batiste, who would have been here, but he's busy doing his job for Stephen Colbert. But he did send us this message. Well, maybe he didn't send us that message. Right. All right. Well, if we can cue that up, we're going to cue it.
We can make it through this. Let's go. Hello, it's John Batiste here, and I want to say thank you to the Jazz Museum in Harlem, to Regina Carter, to John Daversa, and to everyone involved with getting the vote out. We need everyone's voice right now, and this is the time. So thank you so much for your love and your encouragement And everybody out there, stay strong. We can make it through this. Let's go. Let's go. Let's swing it out. Swing states. We need you more than ever. This is the time. Much love.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. I mean,
Thank you, John.
when was the last time, when was the last time when we had an election coming up that you had so much ingredients going into the gumbo? Musicians, athletes, regular people, elderly, young people, 12 years old talking about the election. Think about this. When was the last time? And this is an opportunity that we have, and we cannot afford to blow it. I mean, we won't get this opportunity again.
You're muted, Larry.
Unmute yourself, host.
Larry, you are muted.
Yeah.
I'm completely muted. No one heard any of that.
No.
So anyway, I want to again thank Checo Yancy and Crystal Joseph, who are doing this work in the trenches and making this happen. And I applaud that. And I've learned a lot. I want to thank Regina Carter, who's one of the great artists, great musicians of my generation. His music continues to resonate widely. Thank the Jazz Museum in Harlem and everyone here. Normally, I would ask people if they have any last words, but I think we have only one last word together. It's a 4-letter word. It's a good 4-letter word. So maybe we can all intone it together now as a chant. 1, 2, 3. Vote. All right, everyone vote. Thank you so much.
We have a turn. No surrender, no retreat. Get out and vote.
Your life depends on it.
Have a plan.
Have a plan. And talk to each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Crystal,
you.
Checo, thank you. You all as well.
I'm going to listen to some of your